Blood stained the pristine marble floors of the Baccarat Hotel. Yet Matteo Visconti barely blinked. He simply adjusted his bespoke Brioni cuffs, locked his dark, predatory gaze onto the woman frozen in the corner, and shattered her entire reality with one public, undeniable claim. Genevieve Sinclair stood in the shadows of the Grand Salon, her earpiece buzzing with the frantic chatter of the catering staff. As a senior event coordinator for Colin Cowie Lifestyles, she was used to high-stress environments. Tonight's event, the annual philanthropic gala for the Astor Foundation, was supposed to be a flawless execution of crystal, champagne, and exorbitant wealth. Instead, it had become a slaughterhouse. 10 minutes ago, the string quartet had been playing Vivaldi. Now, the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom were splintered, and the scent of gunpowder choked the air, masking the heavy perfume of the $100 white roses she had personally arranged. Genevieve pressed her spine against the cold, velvet-flocked wallpaper of the service alcove. Her breath came in short, jagged gasps. Through the crack in the heavy oak door, she had a clear view of the carnage. 4 armed men in tactical gear lay dead on the floor. Standing over them, looking entirely too calm for a man who had just engaged in a firefight, was Matteo Visconti. I was a ghost in the New York underworld, a man whose name was whispered in boardroom meetings and precinct backrooms alike. Heir to a syndicate that controlled the eastern seaboard's shipping ports, Matteo was ruthless, calculating, and dangerously elegant. Tonight, he wore a charcoal Brioni tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders flawlessly, completely unbothered by the chaos he had just orchestrated. But Genevieve hadn't just witnessed Matteo defending himself. She had seen what happened right before the first shot was fired. She had seen Arthur Pendleton, one of Matteo's most trusted lieutenants, subtly kick a dropped Glock across the floor toward the lead assassin. It was an inside job. A coup. Matteo turned his head, his sharp jawline illuminated by the shattered crystal chandeliers. His eyes, a piercing, icy blue, scanned the room. He didn't look at the bodies. He looked directly at the service alcove. I knew she was there. Genevieve's heart slammed against her ribs. She tried to step back, to flee through the kitchen corridors, but a heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder. Enzo, Matteo's towering enforcer, materialized from the shadows, dragging her out into the harsh light of the ruined ballroom. "Look what I found trembling in the pantry, boss," Enzo rumbled, pushing Genevieve forward. She stumbled, the heels of her Louboutins catching on the edge of a Persian rug. She caught herself before she fell, refusing to cower. Genevieve forced her chin up, meeting Matteo's gaze. Up close, he was terrifyingly handsome, radiating a dark, suffocating authority. "You saw everything," Matteo stated. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low, smooth baritone that sent a shiver down her spine. "I saw nothing," Genevieve lied, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm just the event coordinator." "I want no part of this." At that moment, the wail of police sirens pierced the night. Flashing red and blue lights painted the tall windows of the Baccarat Hotel. The NYPD was seconds away from swarming the building. Arthur Pendleton stepped forward, wiping a smear of blood from his cheek, playing the part of the loyal soldier. "Matteo, we need to leave. The cops are here. Let Enzo handle the girl. She's a liability." Genevieve saw the subtle shift in Matteo's expression. He knew. He didn't know what she had seen. But his predatory instincts recognized that Arthur wanted her dead far too quickly. If Arthur wanted her gone, Matteo needed her alive. The heavy ballroom doors swung open, and NYPD Captain Harris stormed in, flanked by a dozen heavily armed SWAT officers. "Weapons down! Nobody moves!" Harris barked, his eyes sweeping the blood-soaked room before landing on the Visconti boss. "Matteo, I should have known. You're coming with us." "On what charge, Captain?" Matteo asked smoothly, holding his empty hands up in a placating gesture. "I was merely attending a charity function when these men opened fire. I am a victim here," Harris scoffed, noticing Genevieve standing rigidly between Matteo and Enzo. "And who is this? A hostage?" Arthur stepped closer to Matteo, lowering his voice. "Give her to the cops, or let Enzo deal with her out back. If she talks..." Matteo silenced Arthur with a single, chilling glance. Then, in a move that defied every expectation, Matteo closed the distance between himself and Genevieve. He didn't grab her violently. Instead, his large, warm hand cupped the back of her neck, his thumb resting over her racing pulse. "She is not a hostage, Captain," Matteo said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent, tense room. He looked down at Genevieve, his icy blue eyes burning into hers with a silent command. "Play along, or die." "Then who is she?" Harris demanded, his hand resting on his holster. "She's with me," Matteo declared. He leaned in, his lips hovering mere millimeters from her ear, the warmth of his breath making her shiver. In a voice loud enough for Arthur, the police, and the surviving guests to hear, he delivered the kill shot to her old life. "You're sleeping beside me tonight." Before Genevieve could process the sheer audacity of the command, Matteo's mouth crashed down onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a brand. His lips were demanding, possessing, consuming her completely in front of a room full of heavily armed police and mobsters. Genevieve gasped against his mouth, her hands instinctively coming up to push against his solid chest, but he pulled her tighter, his arm wrapping around her waist like an iron band. For 5 agonizing, intoxicating seconds, the world dissolved into the scent of Tom Ford cologne, gunpowder, and raw male dominance. When he finally pulled back, Genevieve's lips were swollen, her eyes wide with shock. Matteo turned back to Captain Harris, tucking Genevieve securely against his side. "My fiancé and I have had a very traumatic evening, Captain. My lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell will be in touch in the morning. Good night." The armored Mercedes Maybach S6 sliced through the slick, rain-soaked streets of Manhattan. Inside the soundproof cabin, the silence was deafening. Genevieve sat as far away from Matteo as the leather bench would allow, her hands clenched in her lap. The city lights flickered across his face, highlighting the sharp, unforgiving angles of his jaw. He was scrolling through a secure, encrypted tablet, seemingly ignoring her entirely. She needed to think. She needed to breathe. Genevieve wasn't just an event coordinator. The employment record at Colin Cowie Lifestyles was a carefully crafted cover. Her real name was Genevieve Sinclair, but her actual paycheck came from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, operating under a joint task force with the FBI. For 8 months, she had been embedding herself in high society, tracing a $40 million money laundering pipeline that led directly to the Visconti syndicate. Her handler, Special Agent Thomas Kessler, had strictly ordered her to remain on the periphery. Observe, copy the ledgers, do not engage. Now she was sitting in the back of a bulletproof car with the head of the syndicate, having just been forcibly drafted as his fake fiancé to save her from his treacherous lieutenant. If Matteo found out she was a federal agent, A bullet to the head would be the merciful option. You're thinking so loudly it's giving me a headache, Matteo murmured, not looking up from his tablet. Genevieve stiffened. I'm thinking about how I'm going to explain to my boss why I left a multi-million-dollar gala in the company of a suspected crime boss. Matteo chuckled, a dark, rich sound. He set the tablet aside and turned his head to look at her. Your boss at the catering company, or your boss at the FBI? The air in her lungs vanished. Genevieve forced her face to remain completely impassive, though her heart was drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. I have no idea what you're talking about. Please, Genevieve, Matteo said, leaning forward. The scent of him, danger and expensive scotch, filled her senses. You didn't flinch when the shooting started. When Enzo grabbed you, you didn't scream. You checked my perimeter. You have government training written all over you. I knew the moment I saw you cross-referencing the guest list last week at the Pierre Hotel. If you think I'm a federal agent, why am I alive? She demanded, dropping the terrified civilian act. Because right now, we have a mutual problem, Matteo replied, his gaze darkening. Arthur Pendleton. He orchestrated tonight's hit. He thought he could take me out and use you as the scapegoat. If I had left you with the police, Arthur's men in the precinct would have killed you in a holding cell before morning. So you kissed me. You claimed me. I made you untouchable, Matteo corrected smoothly. In my world, what is mine is protected by the full wrath of the Visconti family. Arthur cannot touch you now without starting a civil war he isn't ready to fight. And what happens to me? You play the role, Matteo said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. You stay by my side. You sleep in my bed. And in exchange, I let you live long enough to take down Arthur with me. The Maybach pulled into the subterranean garage of a luxury fortress in Tribeca, 443 Greenwich Street, famously known for housing celebrities and billionaires who craved extreme privacy. Enzo opened the door, his eyes lingering on Genevieve with deep suspicion. Matteo led her to a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling 6,000-square-foot penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping, panoramic view of the Hudson River. The decor was aggressively masculine: dark walnut, brushed steel, and black leather, offset by millions of dollars in modern art. Enzo, Matteo called out, tossing his keys onto a marble console. Sweep the perimeter. Have security double the rotation downstairs. Boss, with all due respect, Enzo began, glaring at Genevieve. Bringing her here is a mistake. If she's a Fed— I didn't ask for your opinion, Enzo, Matteo interrupted, his voice lashing out like a whip. I gave you an order. Enzo clamped his jaw shut, gave a stiff nod, and disappeared down the hall. Genevieve stood in the center of the living room, feeling entirely out of her depth. I don't sleep with targets, Visconti. Matteo walked over to a crystal decanter and poured 2 glasses of Macallan 25. He walked back to her, extending 1 glass. When she didn't take it, he set it on the table beside her. I said you are sleeping beside me, Matteo said, stepping into her personal space. He reached out, his knuckles lightly brushing against her cheek. The touch was shockingly gentle, sending an involuntary jolt of electricity down her spine. I never said you had to sleep with me, though I imagine keeping your hands to yourself will be a challenge. Genevieve slapped his hand away. Your arrogance is astounding. It's not arrogance if it's a fact, Matteo whispered, leaning in closer. His eyes flicked down to her lips, remembering the taste of her from the hotel lobby. Arthur is watching. My men are watching. If they suspect for a second that this is a sham, you're dead. You need to convince them that you are utterly, irrevocably obsessed with me. I am a trained operative, Genevieve said, refusing to back down, her chin tilted defiantly. I can fake anything. Matteo's lips curved into a wicked, devastating smile. We'll see about that, Genevieve. The bedroom is down the hall on the right. You have 10 minutes to get ready. And don't try the panic room. The biometric scanners only respond to my retina. As Matteo walked away, leaving her standing in the dimly lit penthouse, Genevieve realized with a sinking dread that she wasn't just an undercover agent anymore. She was the property of a mafia king. And the most dangerous part wasn't the assassins waiting outside. It was the undeniable, treacherous heat stirring in her own blood whenever he looked at her. The master bedroom of the penthouse was a study in intimidating luxury. Charcoal silk walls, a custom California king bed draped in 1,000 thread-count fret linens, and a wall of reinforced glass overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. Genevieve stood by the window, wearing a borrowed white button-down shirt that smelled intoxicatingly of cedar and Matteo Visconti. Behind her, the en-suite bathroom door clicked open. Matteo stepped out. I was shirtless, a towel slung low on his hips. The harsh overhead lighting caught the intricate map of scars across his sculpted chest and abdomen, souvenirs of a life built on violence. Water dripped from his dark hair, trailing down the sharp planes of his stomach. Genevieve swallowed hard, forcing her gaze to remain fixed on his face, though the sudden spike in her pulse betrayed her. You can take the bed, Matteo said, walking toward a mahogany wardrobe. He tossed a heavy silk duvet onto a low leather chaise lounge in the corner. I don't sleep much anyway. I thought the point was to convince your men we were inseparable, Genevieve challenged, crossing her arms over her chest. Matteo paused, turning slowly. The predatory grace in his movements made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Are you inviting me into that bed, Genevieve? I'm establishing the parameters of our arrangement, she shot back, though her voice lacked its usual icy precision. If Enzo walks in, Enzo knows better than to open my bedroom door without knocking, unless he wants to lose a hand, Matteo replied softly. He walked over to her, closing the distance until the heat radiating from his skin enveloped her. He reached out, his thumb tracing the delicate line of her jaw. But if you insist on making this authentic. Before she could protest, Matteo swept her off her feet. Genevieve gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his thick neck as he carried her to the massive bed and dropped her onto the mattress. The springs barely shifted as he climbed in beside her, pulling the heavy sheets over them both. Sleep, agent, he murmured, clicking off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Tomorrow, we go to war. Genevieve lay rigid in the dark, acutely aware of the dangerous, powerful man lying inches away. She expected him to try something, to use his position to intimidate her further. Instead, within minutes, his breathing slowed to a deep, rhythmic cadence. He trusted her enough to sleep with his back exposed. That realization was far more dangerous to her composure than any physical threat. The next morning, the penthouse was a hive of controlled chaos. Genevieve emerged from the bedroom wearing a sleek, tailored Miu Miu blazer and slacks that Matteo's private shopper had delivered at dawn. In the living room, Matteo stood at the head of a massive marble dining table, flanked by Enzo and 3 other heavily armed men. Spread across the table were blueprints of a building Genevieve recognized immediately. The Aman, New York, the ultra-exclusive hotel in the Crown Building. Arthur called a meeting of the Syndicate Commission for tonight at the Aman, Matteo was saying, his voice a low, lethal hum. He wore a navy Tom Ford three-piece suit, looking every inch the billionaire kingpin. He's going to make his move. He'll tell the commission that I've grown weak, that I brought a federal rat into our inner circle, and that I need to be removed. He has the votes, boss, Enzo grunted. The Lucchese and Calabrese heads are backing him. We walk in there, it's a firing squad. Genevieve stepped into the room, drawing every eye. Enzo's hand subtly drifted toward his shoulder holster, but Matteo silenced him with a sharp look. We go to the meeting, Genevieve said, her voice clear and commanding. The room went dead silent. Enzo scoffed. And why should we listen to a cop? Because I have something Arthur doesn't know about, Genevieve replied, pulling a small encrypted flash drive from her pocket. She looked directly at Matteo. Before my handler put me under cover, I intercepted a data stream from a Cayman Islands server routing through Butterfield Bank. Arthur hasn't just been plotting a coup. He's been skimming from the commission's offshore accounts for 3 years. $40 million, Matteo. Matteo's eyes narrowed, a dangerous, calculating light sparking in his icy blue irises. Can you prove it? If I can get access to the secure terminal in the Aman's private boardroom, I can project his bank ledgers onto the screens before he even opens his mouth, she promised. Suddenly, Genevieve's burner phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a secure line, one only her hand. Special Agent Thomas Kessler, possessed. She glanced at the screen, her blood running cold. Matteo noticed the shift in her demeanor. Answer it. Put it on speaker. Genevieve hesitated, then tapped the screen and set it on the marble table. Kessler. Genevieve, thank God. Kessler's frantic voice echoed in the room. The task force is pulling the plug. We know you're with Visconti. The NYPD report flagged you. Listen to me. You need to get out of there. Leave Visconti's ledger on the server and get to the extraction point. Let Arthur Pendleton finish him tonight. Genevieve froze. How do you know Arthur is making a move tonight, Kessler? That intel isn't on any FBI wire. Silence stretched over the line. A heavy, damning silence. Kessler, Genevieve said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You're on Arthur's payroll. Genevieve, don't be stupid, Kessler snapped, his tone turning vicious. Visconti is a dead man walking. Arthur is paying us double what the Bureau does to look the other way. If you stand by Visconti tonight, I will burn your credentials. You'll be labeled a rogue agent. You will go down with him. Matteo leaned over the table, his face inches from the phone. Agent Kessler, Matteo said, his voice laced with venomous calm. If I were you, I would start running. Because when I am finished with Arthur tonight, I am coming for you. Matteo crushed the phone beneath the heel of his Oxford shoe, shattering the glass and cutting the connection. Genevieve stared at the broken pieces, her chest tight. Her career was over. Her agency had betrayed her. She was completely cut off, trapped in the underworld, with no lifeline. Matteo stepped around the table and stood before her. He reached out, his warm hands gripping her shoulders, grounding her. You have no one left, Genevieve. Only me. She looked up into his eyes, seeing the ruthless truth reflected there. Then we better not miss tonight. The private subterranean boardroom of the Aman. New York smelled of expensive cigars, aged bourbon, and impending violence. The 5 heads of the Syndicate Commission sat around a massive obsidian table, their faces shadowed and grim. At the far end stood Arthur Pendleton, looking smug and victorious. When the heavy oak doors swung open, the room fell dead silent. Matteo Visconti walked in with the casual, terrifying confidence of a panther entering a cage of lesser predators. His hand was firmly secured around Genevieve's waist, pulling her flush against his side. She wore a backless crimson silk gown that left a trail of fire in her wake, looking less like a federal agent and more like the ruthless queen of a dark empire. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face here, Matteo," Arthur sneered, gesturing to the armed guards lining the walls. "And you brought the Fed with you. You've insulted the Commission for the last time." "Sit down, Arthur," Matteo ordered, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. He didn't look at his treacherous lieutenant. Instead, he addressed the 5 crime bosses. "Gentlemen, Arthur has called you here to accuse me of treason. He claims my fiancée is an undercover agent and that I am compromised." "Isn't she?" demanded Don Rossi, the oldest man at the table. "She is a woman who possesses a very specific set of skills," Matteo said smoothly, pulling out a chair for Genevieve. "Skills that have uncovered a rat in our house. And it isn't her." Genevieve didn't sit. Instead, she smoothly slid the encrypted drive from her clutch and plugged it into the boardroom's central console. Her fingers flew across the glass keyboard, bypassing the hotel's security firewall with frightening speed. "Stop her!" Arthur barked, drawing his weapon. Before he could raise it, Enzo and Matteo's men had their Sig Sauers drawn and aimed directly at Arthur's head. "Let the girl finish," Don Rossi rumbled, waving a hand. Genevieve hit the final keystroke. The massive digital screens lining the boardroom walls flared to life. Rows and rows of banking data, offshore routing numbers, and shell company names illuminated the dark room. "What you are looking at," Genevieve announced, her voice echoing with absolute authority, "is the private ledger of Arthur Pendleton, specifically his accounts at Butterfield Bank in the Caymans. Over the last 36 months, he has diverted $40 million from the Commission's shipping revenues into his own pockets. He bought FBI agents to cover his tracks and orchestrated a hit on Matteo to seize control before the audit." The room erupted. The mob bosses stared at the screens, their expressions morphing from skepticism to murderous rage. Arthur's face drained of color. "It's a lie. She fabricated the data. She's a Fed. She set me up." "The routing numbers are live, Arthur," Matteo said, stepping slowly toward his former friend. "The Commission can verify them right now." Don Rossi pulled a sleek Patek Philippe phone from his pocket, dialing a number. He spoke rapidly in Italian, his eyes locked on the screen. A moment later, he hung up and looked at Arthur with cold, dead eyes. "The accounts are real," Rossi stated. "The money is there." Arthur panicked. He lunged towards the door, but Enzo's massive frame blocked the exit. Arthur raised his gun, aiming wildly at Genevieve. "I'll kill you, you bitch!" A single, deafening gunshot shattered the tension. Arthur's eyes went wide. The gun slipped from his hand, clattering against the marble floor. A dark bloom of crimson spread across his chest. He collapsed backward, dead before he hit the ground. Genevieve flinched, the ringing in her ears disorienting her. She looked to her right. Matteo stood there, his suppressed Beretta still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. His eyes were locked on Arthur's body, devoid of any remorse. He had executed the man who had been like a brother to him, without a second of hesitation. Matteo holstered his weapon and turned to the Commission. "The debt is settled. The stolen money will be routed back into the syndicate's central accounts by morning." Rossi nodded slowly, a sign of ultimate respect. "You have handled your house, Matteo. And the woman?" Matteo turned his gaze to Genevieve. The coldness vanished, replaced by a possessive burning heat that made her breath hitch. He walked across the room, ignoring the blood on the floor, and stopped inches from her. "She is not a federal agent anymore," Matteo declared, his voice rough with emotion he rarely showed. He reached out, his hand sliding to the nape of her neck, tangling in her hair. She is Genevieve Visconti, and anyone who questions her loyalty again will answer to me. I didn't wait for a response. Right there, in a room filled with the most dangerous men in the city, surrounded by the scent of gunpowder and death, Matteo crashed his lips down on hers. This kiss was different from the one at the hotel. It wasn't a desperate act of survival. It was a promise. It was claiming her body and soul. Genevieve surrendered to it, her hands gripping the lapels of his suit, kissing him back with a fierce, reckless hunger. The FBI had abandoned her, but the Mafia King had moved heaven and earth to protect her. Later that night, back in the silence of the Tribeca penthouse, Genevieve stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights bleed into the dark waters of the Hudson. Matteo came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his solid chest. He pressed a kiss to the curve of her shoulder, his lips lingering on her bare skin. "Kessler is gone," Matteo murmured. "My men found his apartment empty. He's on the run." "He'll keep running," Genevieve said softly, leaning into Matteo's embrace. "He knows what happens to people who cross you." Matteo turned her around in his arms, his icy blue eyes tracing the contours of her face. "And what about you, Genevieve? Do you want to run? I can give you a new identity, a new life anywhere in the world. You don't have to stay in this darkness." Genevieve looked at the ruthless, beautiful man who had shattered her reality and rebuilt it in his own image. She reached up, tracing the faint scar along his jawline. "I don't want a new life," she whispered, her heart finally accepting the truth she had been fighting since the moment he first claimed her. "I want you." Matteo's eyes darkened with raw, unfiltered desire. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her toward the bedroom, no longer pretending, no longer playing a game. The fake engagement was over. The real reign had just begun. Did you love this thrilling mafia romance? The twists, the betrayal, and the undeniable chemistry between Genevieve and Matteo kept us on the edge of our seats. If you want more gripping, high-stakes romance stories just like this one, hit that like button, share this video with your fellow romance addicts, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite moment, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story.